Ladies and gentlemen, let us cast our gaze upon the unfolding and increasingly perplexed drama within the sphere of women's professional basketball, specifically focusing our attention on the nascent venture known as Unrivaled. We are currently witnessing a spectacle that is profoundly disorienting, a narrative arc so inherently fraught with contradiction that it demands our immediate, unwavering, and critical analysis. We stand at a juncture where the carefully constructed promotional rhetoric clashes violently with the observable reality on the court. The premise was simple, yet ambitious. A new league ostensibly designed to showcase the elite, to be elevated by a superstar player whose very presence was predicted to be a rising tide for the entire enterprise. However, as we sift through the layers of marketing and public relations, we are compelled to confront a truth that is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. This alleged all-world superstar, the individual tapped to be the face and the force of this new competition, has seemingly failed to elevate the product in any tangible, meaningful capacity. In fact, if we are to be brutally honest and strip away the veneer of hype, this player has not elevated the league at all. We are observing a situation where, despite the cacophony of support from a specific section of the fan base and media, the empirical evidence tells a starkly different story. Consider, if you will, the optics of the venues themselves. We are not speaking of cavernous NBA arenas here, but rather smaller, more intimate settings in Dallas. Yet, even in these modest accommodations, there is a struggle to achieve capacity. It is a striking indictment of the superstar narrative when a player touted by many as superior to Caitlin Clark cannot compel a sellout crowd in a limited space. There exists a vocal contingent, a persistent chorus within the basketball community that will vehemently assure you of this player's preeminence. They will argue with almost religious fervor that she is more popular, more skilled, and more integral to the sport than Clark. But that is precisely why we must engage in this analysis, to sift through the obfuscation, to cut through the accumulated BS, and to arrive at the unvarnished truth. We are speaking, of course, of Paige Bueckers, a prominent member of what can only be described as the Yukon Mafia. Her positioning within the current landscape of women's basketball is not merely a matter of athletic merit, it appears to be a matter of institutional preference. She checks the boxes. She fulfills a specific agenda that seems to be favored not only by the league's established hierarchy, but also by a significant portion of its fellow players, coaches, and general managers. There is a palpable sense that the leadership structure of the sport prefers their icons to fit a certain mold, to adhere to a specific lineage. Bueckers fits this description seamlessly. It was the prevailing understanding, the sold narrative, that she would arrive in Unrivaled and dominate the proceedings, thereby validating her status as the heir apparent to the league's throne. But let us look at the Unrivaled League itself with a critical eye. What we are witnessing is essentially second-rate women's basketball. It is a product devoid of the true transcendent stars that drive global interest. When one surveys the roster, the absence of the pantheon is glaring. There is no Caitlin Clark, there is no Aja Wilson, there is no Sabrina Ionescu. Even Kelsey Mitchell, a star in her own right, cannot single-handedly carry the weight of a league that lacks the upper echelon of talent. Furthermore, the absence of Angel Reese is a development that speaks volumes. It is, in my estimation, a profound indictment on the league's perceived value. We must acknowledge the reports that Reese literally viewed the opportunity as not worth her time. She chose, quite deliberately, not to participate. When a figure of her prominence looks at a startup league and decides that her time is better spent elsewhere, it casts a long shadow over the viability and prestige of the competition. So, we find ourselves watching a league bereft of its biggest potential draws, relying heavily on the performance of Paige Bueckers to generate momentum. And how has that transpired? We must examine the recent events on the court to understand the depth of the disconnect between expectation and reality. Bueckers' team, the Mist, did indeed get off to a statistically strong start, securing a 2-0 record with what some might call impressive wins. However, the facade quickly began to crumble. They suffered a loss to the defending champions, Rose BC, a stumble that could perhaps be forgiven as part of the ebb and flow of competition. But they had a golden opportunity to bounce back, to demonstrate resilience against Vinyl BC on a Saturday night. They did not bounce back. To say they were defeated would be a gross understatement. The Vinyl BC did not just win, they ran away with the contest in a manner that bordered on the humiliating. The final scoreline, an astonishing 81-6, represents a level of non-competitiveness that is almost difficult to comprehend in a professional setting. Even if one were to look past the sheer magnitude of the final score, the flow of the game was telling. The score didn't even feel like it was that close, if such a thing is possible. Just a minute into the second quarter, the Vinyl had already established an 11-point lead and never looked back. By halftime, the deficit was 20 points, with the score sitting at 50-30. The game was, for all intents and purposes, over before the intermission concluded. This is the team that Paige Bueckers is tasked with leading. This is the performance of the player whom the media is rushing to crown. This brings us to the most egregious, almost farcical aspect of this entire saga, the behavior of the sports media. We must turn our attention to the agenda that pervades the reporting on women's basketball. For there are no greater offenders, no bigger culprits in the distortion of reality than the established sports media entities. It appears that rather than reporting on the game as it exists, they are engaged in a project of narrative engineering. We have a situation where Paige Bueckers is leading a team that is getting dismantled by halftime in a secondary league, yet The Athletic, a publication of significant repute, is already positioning her as the 2026 WNBA Most Valuable Player. This prediction, made by insider Ben Pickman, is a masterstroke of cognitive dissonance. It forces us to ask, do they simply hate Caitlin Clark? At this point, the sports media should perhaps just abandon the pretense of objectivity and admit openly that they cannot stand her. It would be more honest than the intellectual gymnastics we are currently witnessing. Let us dissect Mr. Pickman's rationale, for it reveals the mechanisms of this bias. He posits that the Wings point guard, referring to Bueckers, could be the league's MVP in 2026. His argument begins with the premise that the award has been earmarked for specific players for too long. He notes that since 2018, Breanna Stewart or A'ja Wilson has taken home the honor in 6 of the last 8 seasons, with Jonquel Jones and Elena Del Don as the only outliers. He argues that the league possesses too much talent to simply write in Stewart or Wilson for the trophy yet again. He predicts with an air of certainty that someone else will win the award for the first time. Now, on the surface, the desire for parity and new blood is understandable. Pickman mentions Nafisa Collier, noting that she finished second in the voting previously, but claims her candidacy was seemingly derailed by an August ankle injury. He suggests that lingering injury concerns might impact her early season production, thereby opening the door for others. He also acknowledges Alyssa Thomas, noting her 4 consecutive years as a top 5 finisher and her potential to build on her first season in Phoenix. These are reasonable, albeit debatable points. But then, the logic takes a sharp and inexplicable turn. Pickman asserts that if it is not these veterans, then Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers will be the ones to take home the MVP awards, snapping a decade-plus long streak without a guard winning the trophy. And then he delivers the conclusion that betrays the agenda. But for now, I'll take Paige Bueckers. Unbelievable. Truly, purely unbelievable. He attempts to justify this selection by citing her statistics, averaging 19.2 points, 5.4 assists, and 3.9 rebounds across 36 appearances. But we must pause and ask the fundamental question that underpins all MVP discussions. How good are the Dallas Wings supposed to be? Are we now in the business of awarding the most valuable player trophy to a member of a team that by all historical and current metrics sucks? This is where the argument collapses under the weight of its own contradiction. Pickman mentions Caitlin Clark, and one cannot help but feel that her name was included solely as a defensive measure, a tactical inclusion to prevent observers like myself from creating videos pointing out the obvious exclusion. Sorry, not sorry, as the saying goes. We see exactly what is happening here. Why is Paige Bueckers the choice over Caitlin Clark when the competitive disparity between their respective teams is so vast? It is pretty obvious to anyone paying attention to the actual dynamics of the WNBA that the Indiana Fever is going to be in the playoff conversation until the very end. They have the potential to win significant games. They could conceivably finish with the best record in the league. The Dallas Wings, conversely, were terrible. Are we expecting them to suddenly bounce out there and make a deep playoff run simply because of the arrival of a rookie? We have absolutely no idea what that team is going to look like or how they will coalesce. Contrast this uncertainty with the known quantity in Indiana. You have Caitlin Clark, you have Aaliyah Boston. These two are on the same team, forming a foundational duo of immense power. You likely have Kelsey Mitchell returning. With any luck, you have other key pieces coming back. The Fever are building a juggernaut. Historically and logically, to be the most valuable player, one must play on a good team. More importantly, one must elevate that team to greatness. Has Paige Bueckers shown the capacity to elevate her team in the Unrivaled league? Let us look at the results. Who holds the #1 overall pick? Who is looking at a top pick again? The correlation between her presence and team success is, at this moment, tenuous at best. I am just thinking out loud here, but the pattern is undeniable. This brings us back to the central theme of this entire discourse, the agenda. We see how this works, folks. Whether it is ESPN, The Athletic, or other major sports media entities, we have seen this script play out time and time again. I will give them a modicum of credit. They have become sophisticated enough to throw Caitlin Clark's name into the mix, perhaps hoping that by merely uttering it, they can ward off the dogs who would otherwise come for them. But that strategy will not work here. We are going to call them out. That is all there is to it. We see the strategic maneuvering, the attempt to elevate one player while subtly diminishing another. We see the promotion of narratives that align with the WNBA Players Union propaganda, the pushing of Alyssa Thomas, the relentless championing of everyone except the one person who has fundamentally changed the economics of the sport. It is a wild scenario. The media picks a player struggling to lead a team in a secondary league as the future MVP over the player who is currently revolutionizing the professional game. They ignore the empty seats in Dallas to focus on the checked boxes of the UConn lineage. They ignore the blowout losses to focus on the potential. It is a deliberate, highly effective gambit to shift the conversation, but it ultimately fails when confronted with the reality of the game itself. The question remains, why is the media so resistant to the reality of Caitlin Clark? Why do they feel the need to manufacture a rival in Paige Bueckers before she has even played a single minute of professional WNBA basketball? It is a disservice to Bueckers, placing upon her shoulders an expectation she has not yet earned, and it is a disrespect to Clark, who has already proven her worth on the biggest stage. As we continue to monitor this situation, we must remain vigilant against these narratives. We must continue to sift through the rhetoric and demand the truth. The court of public opinion is shifting, and fans are becoming increasingly aware of these editorial choices. Until the media decides to report on the game as it is, rather than how they wish it to be, we will be here to highlight the discrepancies. The reality of the Unrivaled league, with its empty seats and blowout losses, stands in stark contrast to the polished predictions of future MVP trophies. It is a dissonance that cannot be sustained. The game eventually reveals the truth. And right now, the truth is that the agenda is working overtime to obscure the brilliance of one player by artificially inflating the immediate prospects of another. We will see if the Dallas Wings can rise from the ashes. We will see if Paige Bueckers can indeed snap the streak. But for now, based on what we are seeing in the Unrivaled league, the projection seems not just premature, but entirely divorced from reality. And as for the media's role in this, It is, regrettably, exactly what we have come to expect. Thank you for lending your attention to this matter. It is a story that is sure to evolve, and we will be here to analyze every twist and turn. Be sure to engage with the content, like, comment, and subscribe, for the conversation is far from over. Until next time, peace.